You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I have one of my favorite writers in the whole world on the show back with me today. Glen Erik Hamilton has an amazing new book. It's called A Dangerous Breed. This is number 5 in the Van Shaw novel series. Van Shaw has been one of my favorite protagonists since he burst onto the scene a few years ago, and Glen, being his creator, is naturally one of my favorite writers, and I'm super happy to have him back on the show today. Welcome back to the show, Glen.
Hello, Hank. Great to talk to you again.
You too. Van, how about book number 5? How does that feel?
It feels fantastic. I gotta say, it's it's very odd because when you're doing about a book a year, the time goes by so quickly, and it's one of those things where you gotta celebrate every little victory, and sometimes you don't even realize that the big victory is like, hey, a book came out. You're so busy with the next one. It's like, oh yeah, I wrote a book. You have to kind of stop and go, wait a minute, that was a big thing. Let's enjoy that for a minute before we worry about that next paragraph we're trying to write.
So, when you mark time by these events, but you don't look up from the computer long enough to kind of revel in that. And then the next thing you know, there's been 5 books that have come out, and you're like, maybe I should stop and celebrate this a little bit.
Especially when they overlap. That's a strange thing that happens that I'm sure happens to almost all authors who publish on a regular schedule, but that non-authors might not be aware of, is that, generally when a book is coming out, you're certainly celebrating that. You're doing a lot. You're writing guest articles. You might be making appearances, virtual or otherwise, depending upon the what's going on. But you're often usually deep in that next book at the same time. So your head is wrapped up in the next one. And you have to sort of shift gears and say, let's enjoy this one coming out while we have this chance, because it won't come back again.
Right. Man, I remember us talking when Every Day Above Ground came out, and at that time, Van Shaw was beginning to really take shape as a fully formed character. Now that book 5 is out, what kind of space does he take up inside your head? He's really, he really has grown and matured, and we know so much about him now. And so, that one book or 2 books, you can kind of scratch the surface on a character. When you get to around book 5, we're really getting to know Van. Kind of what's your relationship with Van like these days?
Yeah, it's funny that you say. I'm glad that you think that he's grown and he's changed, because that is definitely an intent of the book, right? Sure. He's sort of putting it in a short form. The time frame of the first 5 or so books is more compressed. He's not aging real time, because his time being in the military, active duty in the first one, just getting out of it, reestablishing his life, was such a rich period. I didn't want to rush it. So having him grow and change was important, but not too much necessarily. He's coming to these realizations. He's establishing his personal life and trying to figure out what his purpose is. And so in terms of trying to figure out, where he goes from here, the books are probably going to extend a little bit in time frame, maybe not one per year in real time, but he'll definitely continue to grow and evolve. As far as how much room he takes up in my head, It's an awful lot. We've touched on this. We've touched on this before. Is that Van's thought processes, as often the case with first books and with a first person narration, Van's thought processes are pretty darn close to my own, at least in rhythm, if not skill. He's smarter than I am. It goes back to the old saw of what would the character do in this? Well, try to think of somebody smarter than you are and put them in that. What would they do? Right. Yeah. So it's, but definitely there is the aspect of as I'm writing him, I'm definitely trying to put myself in his shoes. And because I'm always writing, there's a pattern of repetition there that I think it's in your subconscious, where you're, to a certain extent, Van's always looking at the world through my eyes and vice versa. That said, with this book that I'm working on now, the sixth one, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm writing it in third person so that I can break away from him for part of this. And so I can be a third person narration with Van, or with Shaw as he's referred to, but also with the characters who are seeing him, and get a little external view on the world, as well as set up thrilling aspects to that the reader is aware of that that Van himself is not.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I often wonder, when you have a long-running character like Van Shaw, and you are writing from the first-person perspective, he has to kind of absorb your character and you his at some point. And do you ever catch yourself thinking like Shaw, or do those cross ever, or is there a complete separation that he only comes out when you crack open the laptop?
Oh, it definitely happens. It definitely happens. I mean, there's always that aspect of me as a kid who, I was kind of weirdly fascinated by, the bank security cameras and the big metal box with money in it. And, I didn't actually want to rob the place, but I was kind of curious from a puzzle perspective how it worked. And
right.
I think that was certainly part of the genesis of Van, is wanting to write from somebody who saw the world as, or at least was raised to see the world as a series of those kind of puzzles or challenges to crack.
I heard someone use the analogy one time, and they were talking about child rearing and giving children boundaries and things like that. And if you put a bunch of kids on a playground with no fences, they'll kind of tend to congregate toward the middle or somewhere, because they don't know what the boundaries are. But if you put a fence up, they'll go out to the edge and feel safe. And that was the point. But you can always tell which one of those kids is going to be the writer, because they're over there in the corner, not wanting to escape, but seeing what you could do to escape.
Like that. What is the first baby in the family to go over the side of the crib? Right. It's like it always seems to happen a little earlier than you expect as a parent. It's just okay. Oh, the baby's out of the crib now. Okay, well, we have new rules.
Exactly. Glenn, help me remember, but when we talked last year, you told me this great story of you had another project you were working on, and it was not taking shape quite the way you wanted to. And you had some discussions with your publisher, and you decided to go back and kind of reboot. And Van Shaw Book 4 came out of that experience. Whatever happened with that kind of side writing project, and do you have any different feelings about that today?
Yeah, that project is something I still think I'll pick up at some point along the way. Not to reveal too much about it, but it refers a bit to amateur sports and the Olympics, and so it's somewhat evergreen, right? Every four years or so we have a Summer Olympics, and so we can come back to that. If, however, that said, I'm working on the sixth Van book now, and I've got a different idea for a different standalone thriller that I'm pretty excited about, and I think that, I'm not positive, but I think that might be my next go at it. I'm very comfortable with setting aside story ideas and projects until the time is ripe, until I click on whatever aspect of it needs to gel in order to make that fly, or following whatever that is. And as you talked about, when I set aside that project, my publisher and agent were very understanding, and my agent said something to the effect of, you gotta go where your passion lies, right? If you're suddenly now more excited about writing the fourth van because you've got a great idea for that, rather than continuing to bang your head against this, by all means do that, right? That's what you need.
Absolutely.
Knopfler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Knopfler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Knopfler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Knopfler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Knopfler for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Knopfler, Novlr. That's Knopfler.org.
Glenn, we were talking just before we started recording about this kind of global situation that we find ourselves in with COVID-19. And for a lot of writers, we kind of occupy this space where we spend a lot of time alone. That's just you and the computer for a lot of people. I know that you do you still have the day job? Are you still?
I do. I do still have the day job, and that of course, like most day jobs where possible, that's from home now as well.
Gotcha. So the question is, how has this pandemic affected you and your creative process? Because while on the surface, it really shouldn't affect most of us when we kind of work alone anyway. But there's some kind of mental aspects to this, and some people have really been struggling through this time, even though their routine hasn't changed that much. There still are other consequences that have come about. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of increased claustrophobia that I think so many of us are feeling, because we are staying at home for safety. But if your day job is there, and if you have a second job like a writing career, and that's also there, and that also involves staring at a screen, that could easily be, that means you could be looking at that screen for 15, 16 hours a day with no respite, for months on end. And that's pretty challenging. There's also the additional challenge of, as I'm writing the sixth book, I can't do things like go take a trip to Seattle and look around and get inspired by looking at things. That's just not in the cards right now. I suppose I could take a road trip and head up there, but that in itself is a challenge, right? And a bit of a risk. And so so a lot of there's just that, if you're looking at the same walls every day, you've got to find inspiration somewhere else. I've been doing a lot of pleasure reading forcing myself to make the time for that, as busy as things are, largely just to give my imagination something else to chew on.
Right.
Because we can't get out into the world. And we've also tried, we have a very small house, but it allows for a certain amount of partitioning. So we've tried to make sure that everybody has their own space to go to. We've tried to create outdoor spaces where we can, to allow us just to have a slight change of scenery, right? Go right for 2 hours on the porch, go right for 2 hours in the backyard, right? Whatever you can do to shake it up a little bit.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I know that the new book, Dangerous Breed, has been off of your desk as far as the writing goes for quite a while now. We understand how the publishing cycle works. So when COVID came along, A Dangerous Breed had probably been finished for the most part, and
yes,
in the editing phase. Now that, because, as writers, you always have a project you're working on. Has any of this crept into the new work that you're doing?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because that's a debate going on right now. I think with every writer is, given the long lead time, there's the reverse of that too. Of, I finished this book and it's going to come out during the pandemic. I'm working on the next book, and God willing, it comes out long after the pandemic. So do I refer to the pandemic at all, or are we all sick of hearing about that?
Yeah, and is it in the past tense, or?
Right, exactly. Is it in the past tense? How do I refer to it? And so, so I was kind of wrestling with that about 3-4 months ago. And what I decided to do is, look, it seems absurd to ignore it from Van's perspective, because number one is Seattle was sort of one of the first places, certainly in the U.S., that the pandemic was recognized and started to take steps, because it had come across from China, and it was one of the first urban areas that was really affected by it and taking steps to control it many months ago. And it seemed bizarre to sort of ignore that, given how Seattle-centric the books can be. So what I did was, I took a couple of weeks and wrote a short story about Van in lockdown, because I didn't want to have it want to try to guess how it should be incorporated into the novels, but I didn't want to ignore it completely either. And so I wrote a short story called Essential Business,
which is on your website, right?
It's on the website. It's free. Folks can check it out now. It's also going to be available in the mass market of A Dangerous Breed when it comes out, because the editor, I just wrote it. It had nothing to do with publishing at the time. I just wrote it because I felt like I had to write it, which is always the best reason to write something.
Absolutely.
And so I ended up writing this 18-20 page short story. And just shared it with my agent and my editor, and they were like, "Well, we really like this. Can we add this as a bonus for people buying the paperback of A Dangerous Breed?" And I was like, "Yeah, great, fantastic." And maybe that will come to be a regular thing, that I try to write a short story in between books, and have that as a bonus for folks, and for fans of the series. I had thought hard about writing one with CHOP, the Capitol Hill occupied protest,
right?
That was going on for a month or two in Seattle, and I eventually chose not to, or at least not to right now, for two reasons. One is that the news was literally changing every day about it, which is,
right.
It's a time capsule kind of thing, because I wrote that story back in April, the first story back in April. And of course, then we were just dealing with the stress of quarantine and the stress of wearing masks and everything else. And, the Black Lives Matter movement and other protests had not started up yet. Those hadn't gotten going. And so it's sort of already 3 months later is a time capsule of where we were in the first weeks. The CHOP posed a similar problem, but even more accelerated. It's like, okay, if the news is changing every day, at what point do I write this, and at what stage is the protest at the time? again, I didn't want to ignore it, but I also couldn't take another 2 weeks away from writing the book that I'm writing now.
Right.
So the time aspect was just like, okay, I don't have the time to write another 15 to 20 page story right now. Maybe, I've got other stuff to do. Book launches involve, as you know, a lot of guest articles and other things that you write for blogs and things like that. So I was already taking time away from the writing schedule for that, and just decided that was it. But so that was a long answer to your question. But in short, the way that I addressed it is to say, okay, well, let's do something quick, relatively quick and easy, rather than trying to bake this into something that's not going to see the light of day for 15 months, maybe, right?
Well, and if there's not some great fiction that comes out of this Chaz situation, then there have been some opportunities missed. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. I think now that it's history, now that the zone itself is dismantled, and I think now the precinct is reoccupied there, the East Precinct of the Seattle Police Department there on 12. Now that that's happened, we'll get a better perspective of it, because it's very hard to write about history as it's happening,
right,
from a journalistic standpoint. But I wouldn't mind setting a story later in that area on the way. The challenge, of course, being is that I wasn't there. I couldn't get up there, during the time.
Right.
And so, so there's a little, there's challenges with that, but there's also a truthfulness aspect of that
yeah.
I would have really liked to have done had I been able to be in the city at the time.
Well, and that begs the question too, when it comes to fiction, how close to the bone do we need to be or have to be? When you're writing thrillers and mysteries like you are, there's less room to stray from reality as there is for someone who might be writing science fiction or fantasy, for instance. But at what point do we as authors get to take liberty with the actual facts and explore possibilities? That really kind of gets to the marrow of what writers are allowed to do, or what we get to do, or how we get to speak about a subject. So I think some really interesting things are going to come out of that.
I hope so, definitely. I mean, thrillers always deal with a heightened reality, certainly. The villains are more bizarre, the situation's a little more intense than what might reasonably happen. But there is that grounding in the real world enough that people feel like maybe it could happen. And part of that is certainly current events, baking those in.
For sure.
Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.
So speaking of that, and also I just want to say I'm glad you brought up the issue of the short story because I read it on your blog. It's amazing. When you think about writing a story like that, is that different than writing the novel? I mean, obviously we're talking 15, 20 pages as opposed to 300 to 400. But does the short story form, does the writing of that kind of take on a different feel, a different level of preparation than the novel writing does?
It does. Although there's two aspects of it. One is yes, definitely that a short story has to do more in a smaller amount of time. You can't afford big digressions, and you want to establish your world, set up the conflict, set up the challenges, and carry those out in as rapid a fashion as possible without disappointing the reader, right? And hopefully have something to say, hopefully have a point of view that you're getting across as well. But in truth, that's what you're trying to do with every chapter of a novel too. You're trying to have conflict on every page, or a driving force on every page. You're trying to establish new characters in new areas quickly. And the difference being with a chapter, you're leaving people wanting more, if not an actual cliffhanger. Whereas with a short story, most of the time you're looking to conclude it, right? So, and when I get a little daunted by the fact that, I'm writing another 400-page book, what's now? I remind myself that, this is really just a 10 or 12-page short story at a time. This is what we're writing today. We're writing this story, and trying to set that up. And that's a useful way of looking at it. But I also think it reminds me to not have a 5-page digression on the arcane art of safe cracking, which might be fascinating to me and maybe to a few others as well, but kind of interrupts that narrative a little.
I completely get it. And I love your digressions, by the way, but I also love the kind of focus of a short story. So I love that we get both with Van Shaw. It's amazing. Which brings us to the new book, A Dangerous Breed, which, when folks are hearing this, the book has been out for a couple of days now. One thing that I love about Van Shaw is his the lack of a backstory that we have to pull from with a character like him. And what I love about A Dangerous Breed is we start to get to dig into a little bit of that with his mother. Something happens that gets him on that path for his mother. Would you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah. Well, sort of going back to, we talked about the time frame being compressed to the first few books, and it just felt right that Van was raised in a household where his grandfather just wouldn't talk, just refused to talk about Van's mother or any aspect of her life. And he was able to pick up a few facts here and there, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot of sharing. And then by the time Van was burgeoning on adulthood, he escaped into the army and spent, most of the next 10 years overseas, or at least on the other side of the country at Fort Benning. And so with him back, it seemed ripe for him to tackle the natural questions that we would have as adults in looking at our childhood and going, hey, wait, I can figure this out. I can learn more about my parents. Van receives a form letter, essentially, sent to his mother, who's been dead for the better part of a quarter century. Sent to a form letter to her last address, inviting her to her 30th high school reunion. And she became pregnant at 16 and did finish high school, but also was busy raising Van at that time too. And so that sort of sparks his curiosity about who the teenage Moira Shaw was at the time, and who she was as a person. And of course, his natural interest in his father, whose identity he's never known. So he starts doing some digging, and it being a thriller, it's definitely a case of be careful what you wish for, because the young man then, now no longer so young, the young man in question turns out to be the sort of person any sane guy would turn tail and run away from. Looking at, without revealing too much, a lot of the story has to deal with nature versus nurture, right? Is Van who he is because of how he was raised, or is there something inherent in his blood that gives him a facility with violence and a certain craving of action that's built right into him. So hence the title. Dogs are a recurring motif in the book as well, and so that's really sort of the inciting incident and what comes of that, and once you start pulling that thread, you can't stop. He can't stop. He has to know what the truth is, but also knowing what the truth is might get him killed, and maybe other people killed too.
And as if that wasn't plot enough for a thriller, Van gets involved in another situation where one of his friends, Hollis, comes in, and this storyline ramps up to a point where if the other storyline is not, a world-changing event personally for him, this could literally be a world-changing event. Talk a little bit about this story thread and how the two kind of play off of each other. I found it a great exploration of, the personal story that kind of gets magnified into a global crisis.
Yeah, let's see. How do we get into this without spoilers a little bit? Let me come at it from the direction of theme, right?
Okay.
If the A story is about Van's parentage, and how he was raised and so forth, the B story, again, without revealing too much in terms of spoilers, does a couple of things. The him getting pulled into and to a certain extent blackmailed by an extortionist whose name is Bilal Nath. Bilal and his wife Ora essentially are forcing Van to commit a theft of a biotechnology firm. And of course, Van has serious misgivings about doing that, does not want to put whatever they're after, which they won't tell him, into the hands of this international criminal, but at the same time understands that there's a very real sense of danger to him personally if he does not, right? So if and I'm trying to do this without spoilers as best as I can, because I'm playing a little bit with the trope of thrillers too here, where we assume that Nath and Ora, his wife, are after something that will allow them a domestic terror, allow them to blackmail governments or others for domestic terrorism to a certain extent. That's not the whole truth of what's going on. And so I sort of set up that expectation for the reader and for Van himself along the way. It doesn't quite play out that way, and as more thematically to do with the A story along the way. But, structurally, it was a lot of fun. To talk craft for a minute is to say, okay, let's set up the B story rolling, have the A story come out of that, and have the two start to interweave as we go. It was a challenging book to write from that perspective, but I'm really pleased with how it came out, is that there's an A plot and a B plot, and the resolution of one naturally leads to steps that allow the resolution of the other.
Well, and having the benefit of hindsight when you have this finished book, and no doubt lots of planning, lots of editing went into this, because from my perspective, where I get to read this book, I'm like, Glen's an absolute genius. This is brilliant the way he did this, and and you get to go, well, thank you. Of course I am.
That's very complimentary. Thank you.
Glen, because we were talking earlier about COVID and all of this stuff. Now we have the benefit of hindsight, and we look at a book like A Dangerous Breed, and we see that you're playing with some of these scenarios. What happens if something gets loose that could cause a global catastrophe or whatever. It seems like, looking back, well, Glen kind of he predicted some of this in some strange way. What happens when the crazy things that we think of as in the what if scenarios partially start coming true.
Yeah, that's that weird intersection of life and art that it would be great if we had a crystal ball, because then maybe we could prevent some of it from happening. But some of it is just happenstance, as you know. It's just you sort of write these things months ago, and then suddenly it's a real world thing, or at least in Van's case, we have the fear of it coming to pass. In the real world, it has come to pass in a different aspect. There's very little, given the lead time of publishing and stuff, that we can do about that. I would not go out right now and write a pandemic thriller. I don't think not that you should worry too much about the market is at any time, but unless I had a really good idea, I'm not sure anyone wants to read that right now. And I certainly wouldn't want to write it. I think we're all thinking too much about pandemics right now. I don't want to dissuade anyone who has a great idea and wants to pursue that, because that person might be the exception. They might write the ultimate pandemic novel, in a weird way, the great American novel about what's going on right now. And that, I'm sure someone will do that. But from a thriller aspect, I don't want to chase that tiger. Right?
I completely understand. A Dangerous Breed is a must-have for your summer reading TBR list. I'm always excited to see what Van Shaw is getting up to, and what cliff you're pushing him off of as we go along. And this just makes me more excited for next year's, because I'm really excited in some perverse way, Glenn, to see what's going to come out next year, as we all have gone through this time. And while it has been very troubling for most of us, I think it's going to be a fertile time for art. So I don't know what that says about me, but I'm sure it's something.
Well, it's not to get too philosophical about it, but you're right. Art comes from strife, comes from strong feelings, comes from everything that we're dealing with. And, I certainly hope that of all the real world benefits that might come out of this in terms of reevaluation of how we handle situations like this, I hope we also see a lot of great art and a lot of great thought coming around fiction and other things out of this time. But for the time being, we've also got other priorities. We've got to stay safe, and we've got to keep our families and friends safe, and make sure we keep on keeping on.
Well said. Glenn, like I said, I'm always looking forward to the next Van Shaw book. This, is a crowning achievement in the series so far. I can't wait to see what comes next. A Dangerous Breed, there's links to it in the show notes of this episode. Please tell people where they can find you online, Glenn, for the great website that you have, and like you mentioned earlier, the blog that they definitely should be following.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to get after there was a long fallow period with the blog, and this last year I've sort of restarted that, where I've promised myself I'm going to do a post, not necessarily a full short story like I did, but I'm going to do a post at least every quarter, just to sort of keep readers apprised of what's going on with the series and with the career. But folks can find me very easily. It's glenerickhamilton.com, Glenn with one N, Eric with a K. And Twitter is Glen Erik H, and I'm also very easy to find on Instagram and other sources as well. And I really do enjoy hearing from readers, knowing what they like about the stories. Having those conversations is a big part of why I and many others became writers, is to tell stories that people really enjoy and sort of take them on that roller coaster ride. So if you're out there and you're reading the books and you're enjoying them, let me know. Come check it out. Leave a review. Always great for any author and to know what's going on there, and great for getting more books too. If you enjoy what you're reading, no matter what the author, leave a review for them, because that tells them, but it also tells the publisher that you'd like to see more of it.
A Dangerous Breed, the brand new book in the Van Shaw series, out, available everywhere now. Thanks, Glenn, once again for coming on the show and sharing some about the writing life.
Thanks so much, Hank. Wonderful to talk to you as always.
World Anvil is a browser-based world-building platform designed for all world builders, writers and novelists, dungeon masters, game developers, and everyone else. World Anvil keeps your world setting safe and organized, helps you find your characters, locations, plots, timelines, and maps quickly and easily as you write. Then, if you choose, you can showcase your amazing world building to the world, beautifully and interactively, to keep your readers engaged. You can even use our professional tier to build your career selling access to behind-the-scenes content your readers will love and growing your community. Build your world setting in any genre with over 25 custom-built world-building templates, complete with prompts to inspire your creativity. Allow your readers to explore the public parts of your world in an innovative new way with interactive maps, timelines, and wiki-style articles. Give special access to co-authors, beta readers, customers, or patrons to see exclusive behind-the-scenes content. There's a free version to get started with all of the major features. Guild membership offers you a host of extra options, including comprehensive privacy settings, co-authors, presentation options, and so much more. Join our community of over 250,000 world builders, including professional authors. Take part in competitions and learn more about world building at this fantastic online community. Use the coupon code HANK to get 20% off all 6 and 12-month subscriptions. WorldAnvil.com. I'm a recent convert and I know you will be too.